I don't know about you guys, but 2024 went by really fast. Because 2025 is already upon us, and you know what that means. It means new servants to look forward to in 2025. With that said, comment down below the servant you're looking forward to the most, and also why not comment down below how many quartz you have on you at this very moment. And if you guys have been watching me for a while, you guys should already know, at least for the last couple of years, you guys should already know the servant I'm looking forward to the most going into this year. And in case you don't know, we'll get there when we get there, because just like with 2024 and the past couple of years, it's time to continue the tradition of doing a tier list for 2025. And I only laugh a little bit because I feel like a lot of people take these seriously. In the end of the day, these are all subjective picks, and there's certainly other videos and other people out there who have a much more concise, much more objective tier list. My tier lists though are just based on my observations and experiences. It's not really based on hard numbers or spreadsheets or anything crazy like that. So if there's anything you disagree in this tier list, just know it's all subjective. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and explain the tier categories. Now, keep in mind, these are only going to include the 5 stars, because if it included all the 4 stars going to 2025, that would be way too many servants. I don't usually do the 4 stars at all. So as you can see down here, here's all the 2025 SSRs. And then the bottommost tier is meh, up to you, but overall skippable. So pretty self-explanatory, like I said, basically servants that you would be only going after if you're really into the character or you really like their backstory, or maybe there's a niche fun team in which you could use them in which they could shine the most. But otherwise, for the most part, these servants will be skippable. And then the next tier up is good, but there are many alternatives. Again, pretty self-explanatory. These are servants that are good at what they do, whether that be looping or support or whatever. But in the end of the day, there are already a lot of pre-established, maybe even cheaper options to choose from that could do their job just as good, if not better than them. And then the next tier up is highly recommend, parentheses, little to no competition. So these are like the cream of the crop, best servants to go for, in my opinion, going into 2025, who have little to no competition in terms of what they do, whether again that be looping or support, or maybe a hybrid of the two, or maybe they do something super unique that by proxy they just have no competition, since what they do is really unique to them. And then we have the highest tier, which is the must-have tier. Now this is the more controversial tier, because just like with 2024, there really is nobody in 2025 who I would personally classify as must-have. From a purely gameplay standpoint, there's nobody on an Oberon level, Koenskaya level, Castoria, Scotty, so on and so forth. There's really nobody on that level. So the must-have tier will be the more subjective of all the tiers. This is where I'm just going to put my favorites, if I'm just going to be honest. But again, comment down below, who would you put at the must-have tier for you personally? Anyway, now that we've explained the tier categories, let's go ahead and look through the 2025 roadmap. Now at the right side of the screen, you can see there's like a roadmap that has all the months from January all the way down to December, which is going to pretty much give us a rough estimate, a rough roadmap of 2025 and what servants, what gachas, what events are going to be coming out. And this was posted on Reddit, so if you guys want to check out the roadmap for yourself and download it and maybe study it, I don't know, I'll put a link in the description and in the pinned comment so you could access that Reddit post. But anyway, starting off 2025 is of course the New Year's 2025 servant, Grigori Rasputin, or for simplicity's sake, Kotomine Kirei. Kirei is a 5-star arts alter ego who has an AoE damaging NP. So automatically you're thinking, can he loop though? And the answer is he can loop, but obviously as an alter ego, he is restricted somewhat because of his class, and he isn't going to hit as hard or be as versatile as somebody like Ibuki, who obviously is considered by many to be the best AoE arts looper. And of course we have a myriad of other AoE arts loopers that when you look at Kirei and you're like, oh, do I really need a 5-star alter ego that could loop at this point? Like I already have a lot of arts loopers. Do I really need Kirei? And it's really up to you, because that's not the only thing he offers. Yes, he could loop, and yes, I have used him for looping myself, but unlike most AoE loopers, he's also capable of support and also capable of being a tank, which there really aren't that many tanks in the game. Like, of course, you have Shielder, obviously Mashu, Leonidas, and I'm sure a couple of others, because with Kirei, not only does he put a 3-turn taunt on himself, that's right, 3-turn taunt, which is really good, to be honest, especially when it comes to boss fights in which you don't want your support servants, maybe your Castorias, to get hit. But the skill also gives him not just 1, but 2 guts. 1 guts is a guaranteed proc, and the second guts lasts for 3 turns and has a 60 to 80% chance of activating, 80% at level 10, which if your RNG is really good, basically means he's not going to be dying for those 3 turns he has taunt. So if you're facing like a pesky Berserker, or maybe an enemy that just had really powerful crits and you're really worried about your Castorias dying to one hit, then Kirei is guaranteed to at least tank one of the hits, and then has a pretty high chance of tanking the rest of the hits for the next 3 turns thanks to his RNG Guts. And when Guts is activated, whether that be from a Craft Essence or maybe an additional buff from a Mystic Code or an additional servant, he's going to give 20% NP damage up to the entire party for 5 turns. Not just 1 turn, not just 3 turns, but 5 turns, which is pretty crazy because if your RNG is really good, or if you're able to stack enough guts, then that is a lot of NP damage up. Now, obviously, when it comes to looping and farming, that really isn't that relevant. Being able to tank hits and revive and then give it NP damage up to everybody, that's not really going to come into play unless you have like a really niche Chen Gong team or something. But as far as like traditional arts looping, where Kirei is the main offensive servant, yeah, that's not really going to come into play. But again, I personally wouldn't use Kirei in that kind of role. Obviously, you can if you want to. I would use him more as like a pseudo support tank servant that could do a little bit of everything. Can he loop? Yes. Can he support? Yes. Can he tank? Yes. Can he even heal the party? Yeah. His first skill is a targetable heal that could clear debuffs. His second skill also supports evil servants, give them an additional NP gauge as well as arts effectiveness up. So again, you could put him in a weird fun team with like Domon or Moriarty or Van Gogh, in which they could do evil shit together, I guess is the best way to put it. Not to mention his NP also puts burn and curses. So again, that could go well with somebody like Van Gogh, like I said. Or in terms of burn, maybe like Yang Guofei. I don't know why you would team him up with Yang Guofei, but still, there's a ton of different fun little options you could use Kirei in. Also, going back to his third skill, it does get a buff later down the road. It just got a buff like 2 weeks ago, but at the time of recording this, which basically makes it so his RNG guts is stackable with other type of guts. And he gets an additional buff where every time he gets hit, not even just gets killed, but just gets hit in general, he doesn't even have to have his guts proc, where he gets 10% crit up for 3 turns. So in a longer drawn out fight, you're talking about a servant that's not only going to have big NP damage the longer the fight goes on, but you're talking about more crit damage as the fight goes on as well. So there's a ton of fun things you could do with Kirei. Like I said, support, tank, looper, maybe even a solo servant. I've seen some videos in which people use him as a solo servant, which he is more than capable of doing thanks to his essentially unlimited guts. In a lot of ways, Kirei, while he isn't amazing at any one given thing, he is really good at everything he is capable of doing. So I'm sure there are going to be people who are going to disagree with this assessment because, of course, I'm biased. This is all a subjective tier list, so don't get mad at me. But I think given the fact that he's pretty good at every single thing, and in my opinion, one of the best tanks in the game, I would even go as far as saying, again, very subjective, I would go as far as saying he's probably the best tank in the game. Like, besides Shielder, of course, Shielder being the cheapest servant, being the free servant, being the first servant we get in the game. In terms of being a pseudo tank, pseudo support servant, pseudo looper, I mean, I don't know. He doesn't really have much competition, if I'm going to be honest with you. Now, obviously, in terms of looping, he's certainly not even, I would say, in the top 5 in terms of arts looping, but still, he is capable of looping if you do need that. And even if you do have a dedicated looper, I still highly recommend him because his kit is just too cool to pass up on. Again, from a gameplay standpoint, from an everyday use standpoint, there are better options out there. But in terms of challenges, in terms of longer drawn out fights, I think he has a place in those type of environments that a lot of other servants, quite frankly, cannot fill. Now, you could get away with putting him a tier below, but in my opinion, I would highly recommend him. Moving past New Year's, past Kirei, we will be going into one of the earlier Lostbelt 7 gachas with Nitocris Alter. And lo and behold, just like Kirei, we have another arts AoE looper. This time as a 5-star Avenger. So right away, the immediate thought is, okay, she's an arts looper. Is she good as Ibuki? Definitely not. Okay, as an arts AoE Avenger looper, is she as good as Kama? Is she as good as Spacer Star? And it really depends on you and your perspective, but I think generally speaking, she is slightly below Summer Kama, slightly below Spacer Star, but still a really good servant overall as far as looping goes. And really, if you want to oversimplify Avenger Nitocris, you could basically just say she's a 5-star version of Caster Nitocris with the added bonus of actually being able to loop with the Black Grail, because she pretty much has all the bells and whistles of normal Nitocris in that she's able to charge an NP right away, she's able to instant kill the enemies. But unlike her caster counterpart, Avenger Nitocris has better steroids, better buffs for herself that's going to increase her overall damage. And instead of just guts to herself, she has a 60% chance of giving evade to the entire party with her third skill, which obviously in terms of looping, giving the party evade isn't really something that is going to come into play because your priority isn't protecting the team. It's trying to clear the field as fast as possible, but still, it's a nice option to have nonetheless. That, and if you happen to be teaming her up with good alignment allies, which I mean most of the time you probably will be, she has a couple of additional buffs for them as well. And to cap it all off, she also does extra damage against human attribute enemies, which is a pretty good chunk of enemies out there. So again, basically a 5-star version of normal Nitocris with added bonuses. So overall, Nitocris Alter is an amazing servant, and had she been a limited servant, I probably would put her at the good tier. But again, this is when it's going to get a little bit more controversial. Because she is a non-limited servant, despite her animations, despite her art, despite how good she actually is, she is a non-limited servant in the end of the day. And just like with my previous tier list in the past, if you've seen those, in my opinion, I would not prioritize the non-limited servants. At this stage in the game, I think it's just better to prioritize the limited servants. Again, if you really like Nitocris and you really like her animations and you really have no plans for rolling for anyone else in the near future after Nitocris Alter, then go ahead, knock yourself out, go for her. But in my opinion, I think she is overall skippable for the sheer fact that she is a non-limited servant who has a chance of spooking you in the future, which I have been spooked by her twice, I believe. That, and if you really want her but you don't want to roll for her, there's also an SSR ticket that's going to come out in the horizon. Plus, you never know, with NA, we might get exclusive SSR tickets, you never really know, in which you get to just pick her for free. So you might as well wait till she either spooks you or you get that SSR ticket. But again, if you really like her and you don't really care about any of the other servants that's coming out after her, then by all means go for Nitocris Alter. But otherwise, I would say she's overall skippable, especially from a gameplay standpoint in which you probably already have Spacious Star, you probably already have Summer Kama, and if you don't have them, maybe you have Summer Ibuki or any of the other arts loopers out there, especially the cheaper options like Ranmaru X as far as a 4-star Avenger looper and EO who came out last year. So again, there's a lot of options for arts looping, and I don't think Nitocris offers enough to where I would warrant putting her at a higher tier. Had she been limited, maybe I'd put her a tier above, but again, non-limited, that's automatically going to put you all the way down, which is going to be true, spoiler alert, for pretty much every non-limited servant in this list, if I'm going to be honest. Moving down into our next Lostbelt 7 gacha with the homie, the 5-star assassin Tez. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his full name. And Tez is an interesting servant in general for a variety of reasons, because when he first came out, and maybe some of you guys remember, a lot of people were actually not feeling his art style. A lot of people weren't feeling his ascensions, and maybe that's still true to this day. But over time, he's become a fan favorite. And I think a lot of that has to do with his character and his voice lines where he just screams woo every other second, which honestly is probably more than enough of a good reason to roll for him. But even from a gameplay standpoint, he is considered one of the best arts loopers in the game. And that's right. For the 3rd time in a row this year, we have another arts looper. Oh my gosh, this time a 5-star assassin, which is honestly pretty cool because the only other 5-star assassin that's an art servant is Shuten. And as much as I love Shuten isn't really a looper. She's not really known for that or really good for that. And compared to the last 2 arts loopers we talked about, his damage output is absolutely insane. He's so good, in fact, that a lot of people claim that he's better than Spacious Star, which is kind of crazy to think about. Not too long ago, Spacious Star was considered the best, if not one of the best arts loopers. I mean, she still probably is considered one of the best arts loopers in the game. But over time, obviously, with the release of Ibuki, who's pretty much the top tier, people would call Tez the 2nd best arts looper, which again is crazy because he's an assassin. You don't really expect that out of an assassin, but he just is that guy. And outside of farming and challenge quests and longer drawn out fights, he is able to support the team somewhat with his 2nd skill, able to increase everyone's NP gauge, and with his NP at the same time, which increases the party's NP gauge further by 10%. So if you keep spamming that out, you're going to be giving your party NP, which again, in terms of farming, isn't really that great, but in terms of challenges and longer drawn out fights is a really good thing to have. And I've talked about this before, but I love servants who are not only able to loop, but have built-in pierce, which he does have with his NP. So really good, because there's nothing worse than playing a challenge quest or playing a story quest in which you are looping and then all of a sudden the enemy puts up some kind of invincibility or some kind of evade in which you're like, damn it, I wish I brought a CE that could pierce. Well, Tez has that built in, so you don't gotta worry about that. He also has a unique class skill or passive skill that basically increases the Mystic Code skill effects by 10%, which obviously 10% isn't the biggest thing in the universe, but still it's something to keep note of because it is something unique to him. So yes, he is another arch looper, but he is considered the second, if not at least in the top 5 best arch loopers in the entire game. So with all that said, it's kind of self-explanatory. He's definitely a highly recommended servant. In fact, I'm kind of tempted to put Kirei down here, but because I'm biased, I'm going to keep him up there. But I'm not saying Tez and Kirei are on the same level. I think Tez, in terms of just purely looping, is 1000% better than Kirei because his damage output is insanity. And speaking of insane damage output, we are going to be moving on to our next 5-star servant, Kukulkan, who is literally going to be coming out like a week after Tez. It's no exaggeration to say that Kukulkan is one of the best servants to come out of 2025, if not outright one of the best servants in FGO, period. She has pretty much everything you want from a Buster servant. She has crit stars, she has crit damage, she has Buster up, she has attack up. She has all that going for her, in addition to also having invincibility, also having targetable evade, targetable 50% battery. That's right, targetable 50% battery. Now, most of the time, you're going to be using it on herself. You're not going to be using it on Koi and Sky or other servants, but it's still an option. You never know. And speaking of Koi and Skya, since you will most likely be teaming up Kukulkan with Koyan, keep in mind that every time you use one of Kukulkan's skills, it's going to ask you if you want to spend 10 crit stars for additional effects, which sounds like a steep price, right? But at the same time, again, you're teaming her up with Koi and Skya. Koi and Skya's second skill drops 20 crit stars, and there's going to be 2 Koyans, which means 40 crit stars, which means you will most likely be able to utilize all 3 of her skills as additional effects by spending 10 crit stars each, aka 30 crit stars overall. So for her first skill, if you spend 10 crit stars, you get additional attack up. For her second skill, you get that targetable evade that I said, as well as apply sure hit, which sure hit isn't as good as ignore invincible, but still pretty nice to have. And then her third skill gives her NP strength up for 3 turns if you do spend those 10 crit stars. So you're most likely going to be spending those 10 crit stars at least for the first and third skill for that additional damage. That and her NP already drops 30 crit stars. So you're going to have 30 crit stars for next turn if you do want to use those skills the following turn or the turn after that after user NP. And she has a passive, which is probably the most insane passive in the game, where not only does she drop 10 crit stars per turn, which means she has a built-in 20-30 essentially, not only does she give herself 3% NP every turn, which no one's going to complain about residual NP every turn. In addition to all that, which are already pretty insane effects, her passive allows her to convert every invincible buff that she gains into anti-enforcement defense, aka Castoria defense, which means the invincible that she gets from her third skill automatically converted into Castoria defenses. If you use a Mystic Code to give her invincibility, that converts into Castoria defense. If you team her up with Merlin and you use Merlin's second skill to give everybody invincible, Kukulkan is going to have Castoria defense, and so on and so forth. I think you get the picture. Every time she gets invincible, boom, impenetrable defense. And if it's not obvious, that doesn't work for evade. Evade is considered a different type of defense from invincible, but still, the fact that that's a passive, the fact that it just automatically happens is crazy. So you're talking about a servant that's guaranteed to hit hard, thanks to all of her crazy buffs. She's guaranteed to crit because, I mean, she drops crit stars every turn. She drops crit stars with her NP. Like, damn. And she's pretty hard to kill thanks to her anti-enforcement passive. Like, what? The only things that are holding her back is pretty much her class, because had she been a Berserker, she would have been like a must-have servant easily. But because she is a foreigner, she's going to be doing neutral damage 9 times out of 10. So despite all of her steroids, she's still slightly below like an Arjuna Altar, for example. That, and even though she's able to loop, she's not able to Black Grail loop with traditional double Koyan Oberon teams. And notice how I said traditional double Koyan and Oberon teams, meaning that if you're just relying on double Koyan and just Oberon for her to Black Grill loop, it's not going to happen. But even though this is just an SSR tier list, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty as far as like 4-star servants coming out of this year. But later down the road for summer Chloe comes out, and if you look up summer Chloe teams with Kukulkan, basically summer Chloe allows Kukulkan to Black Grill loop with double Koyan and Oberon, but again, with the additional support of Chloe herself. So basically, Kukulkan can Black Grill loop with additional support. So if you're willing to use that additional support to make her Black Grill loop, then that option is there. But again, that does require you to have an additional limited 4-star servant. So that's pretty much her biggest weaknesses. She can't Black Grill loop traditional teams, and her damage is a little bit gimped, not only because of that, but because of her foreigner class. And she has one other thing actually, but I personally wouldn't consider this a weakness because it's like, okay, who really cares about that? But I do know that there are certain players out there that are super anal and super particular about, oh, it takes X amount of seconds for this servant's NP animation, therefore this servant's better because their NP takes 5 seconds less and less clicks and whatever. Because if you recall, every time you use Kukulkan skills, it's going to prompt you, it's going to ask you if you want to spend 10 crit stars for those additional effects. Obviously, that means an additional click, which means like 0.2, 0.5 seconds of extra clicking, which for some people is a big deal because it's like, oh my god, extra clicks. This isn't as time efficient as other buster servants. Ah, my gosh, it takes 5 seconds longer to farm. It's like, okay, well, it's just a couple of seconds. Like, who really cares? But I know some players are very particular about that. So I guess that's another weakness about Kukulkan, is that she does take additional clicks, I guess, to farm. Otherwise, those aren't really the biggest weaknesses ever, to be honest. I find that even without the Black Grill, she still hits pretty damn hard. And even though it does take technically extra clicks to loop, it's like not a big deal. Again, it depends on the kind of player you are. So I would say Kukulkan deserves to be in highly recommend because she is easily the best offensive foreigner in the game. She's just so damn powerful, it's not even funny. And that pretty much wraps up January and Lostbelt 7. So as you can see, Lostbelt 7 is crazy with the servants they come out with. Like I said, had it not been for Nitocris Altria being a non-limited servant, she easily would be at least this tier. So pretty much all the servants from Lostbelt 7 are insanity. But alas, with the end of Lostbelt 7 and the end of January, which means we're going on to February, which means, of course, our Valentine servant in Pope Johanna. Pope Johanna is a 5-star ruler, and guess what? She is an AoE arts servant yet again, making her the 4th AoE arts SSR to come out of this year already. Like, damn. So just like with Kirei, just like with Nitocris Altria, just like with Tez, you automatically are going to be comparing her to pre-existing arts loopers. This is going to be pretty short and sweet and to the point because the thing with Pope Johanna is her looping capabilities are not that great. Her damage is not the best at all. Obviously, she's a ruler, so she's going to be doing neutral damage most of the time. And she doesn't really have the best steroids and the best damage output in general. That, and she kind of tries to be both an offensive servant with her NP as well as a support servant with her skills. Like, on paper, her skills are actually pretty good. But just like how we compare her with other arts loopers in the past, as an art support servant, we gotta compare her with the other art support servants that we are already associated with in the game, such as Castoria, who Pope Johanna is not even close to competing with. Proto-Merlin, same kind of thing. Tamamo, so on, and there's a lot of cheaper options as well. And had Pope Johanna came out maybe in like the earlier years of FGO, 2015, 16, 17, so on, maybe she would be considered a pretty good servant. But the fact that she's coming out this late into the game, where we have a lot of established support servants, it's kind of hard to justify going for Pope Johanna, like, unless you, again, if you really like her character, or maybe you just don't have any art support servants, maybe you just started the game, and then I guess she's kind of justifiable to go for. But otherwise, to put it short and sweet, in terms of looping, she's certainly not the best. There are cheaper options out there, like EO, for example. If you need a arts ruler to loop with, EO is certainly better. And in terms of art support, there's like a million of them like that are better than Pope Johanna. Had Pope Johanna come out earlier, maybe she'd be better. Had she come out as a 4-star or 3-star, she definitely would be better. But as a 5-star, yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry to put you down there, but I guess it kind of makes sense because if you look at my 2024 tier list, Constantine was in the lowest tier. So it kind of makes sense. It's kind of poetic, kind of romantic, I guess you could say, that Pope Johanna ends up down there. If you know, you know. If you've read Trum, you've read Trum. You understand what I'm talking about. And that's pretty much the only new content coming out of February as far as new servants go. So we're going to be moving on into March, in which we'll be introduced to 5-star archer Takasugi. And let me just say, Takasugi has a really cool design. You all guys already know I'm about to say something bad about him. Since I'm leading off with something positive, but he has a really cool design, really cool animations. I like his voice, stuff of that nature. But in the end of the day, his kit is meh. He tries to be a quick looper, but he isn't really the best. His damage isn't really the best. His steroids are okay at best, but not really that great either. He does have guts, so a little bit of survivability, and he does have decreased skill cooldown for an ally, so that could be useful, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of all he has going on for him. Obviously, you could use him as a crit-oriented servant, as a somewhat of a looper, but like I said earlier, he really isn't the best looper, especially as a quick looper, where your competition, your direct competition is Karen and Senoriki, the two top tier quick loopers in the game, and then even the lesser tier quick loopers like Jack MLA, for example. Even a cheaper option like Atalanta, as far as archers go, like they're way better, way more efficient, way more reliable than Takasugi. So I hate to do Takasugi like this because I know he's a fan favorite. He's a husbando. So I'm sorry to all my husbando lovers out there, but I'm gonna have to make it short and sweet with him, just like I did with Pope Johanna. I'm gonna have to put him down here. So I'm sorry. I really apologize for that. Like, a part of me wants to put him in good, but there are many alternatives, because technically, yeah, there are a lot of alternatives, but I kind of hesitate to even call him good. So he kind of just fits there. Unless you really liked his art style or his character or whatever, what have you, I wouldn't go for him otherwise. Now, I'm sure there's somebody going to comment that actually Takasugi performed really well in this very niche quest, in this very niche situation. Okay, maybe he does, but in general, he really isn't the best. After Takasugi, we'll be going into tail end of March, where we will be getting the pre-campaign banner regarding the FGO arcade collaboration event, in which we will finally be introduced to the goddess of Genesis, the goddess of beginning, the goddess of life. Femme fatale herself, the first beast we've ever slayed in FGO way back in 2016, Tiamat, or in this case, 5-star alter ego, Larva Tiamat. And if you guys know me, you guys already know I'm about to glaze mommy like crazy. Not like that though. Not trying to get some Oedipus incest stuff going on, but they do say incest is wincest, you know what I'm saying? And this is where I'm going to be the most biased and the most subjective in my tier list, because again, she is my favorite servant to come out of 2025. And honestly, even from a gameplay standpoint, all jokes aside, if I look at her objectively, she is an amazing servant. To put it as bluntly and as simple as possible, she is pretty much, as far as looping goes, as far as farming and high level farming, like 90 plus level farming, as far as buster looping is concerned, she is on the same level as Mélusine. That's not even an exaggeration. I think most people do agree she is on that same level as Mélusine in terms of damage, in terms of looping, in terms of being a buster monster. Although the argument could be made that Mélusine might be a little bit better, just because outside of farming, she also has ignore invincibility. She also has a single target RTNP if you want to keep her in that form. And she's self-sufficient as far as providing crit stars and crit damage up and whatnot. But if we're just talking purely farming, purely buster NP damage, then Tiamat is easily on Mélusine's level. If I'm going to be honest, probably even slightly above Mélusine's level. And I guess an additional thing that Mélusine has that Tiamat also does not have is invincibility. Tiamat's greatest weakness is the fact that she has no way of protecting herself and has no guts. At the very least, give her guts. Like Lizangle, listen, fuck the tier list for a second. It's just you and me, Lizangle. Full screen mode, everything. Lizangle, she is the goddess of life, the goddess of beginning, bro. Like, did you watch Babylonia, Lizangle? Did you watch Babylonia? Did you read Babylonia in the game? She is supposed to be virtually unkillable. Obviously, this is the servant version of Tiamat, but still, at least keep an aspect of her lore accurate. Like, come on now. Give her at least guts. Give her something to protect herself, to revive herself, because it just makes sense from a lore standpoint. What are you doing? Give her a buff, please. Otherwise, she's pretty much a perfect servant. Nothing to complain about her. Big damage, big mommy milkers, like nothing to complain about, honestly. Like, I'm not gonna put her down here. That would be disrespectful to mommy. I will not put her down here, because, yeah, disrespectful to mommy. I'm not even gonna put her here. That's disrespectful. And you know what, guys? You guys might think I'm insane. You guys might think I'm batshit crazy, super biased, super down bad for mommy, but I'm not even gonna put her here, dog. Like, excuse me, bro? Wait, what do you mean? That's the highest tier. Oh, is it the highest tier? I don't think it is, bro, because she getting her own tier. Tiamat getting her own tier. I don't care what anyone says. Like, you call it bias, you can call it whatever you want. Oedipus complex, I don't care, bro. Listen, mommy deserves the best. She deserves the topmost tier, a tier dedicated for herself. So yeah, Tiamat, in my eyes, that damn good. But in all seriousness, no, she's probably more so like this tier, probably. That's probably a bit more realistic. But screw that, no, she gets this tier. And pro tip, just letting you know, maybe I'll make a dedicated video for this at another given point in time. Outside of farming, she's actually pretty good in challenge quests if you team her up with Castoria and Himiko, or Castoria and Reynas. Those three in a team, pretty damn good. Also, did I mention her third skill? Her third skill, bro? It's a 2-turn cooldown. 2-turn cooldown on her third skill. 10% NP gauge to the party, NP damage to the party, as well as heal to the party, bro. Like 2-turn cooldown. It's the lowest cooldown in the game at the time she comes out. Obviously, right now in JP, that's changed a little bit, but still pretty short cooldown, all things considered. Plus, if you team her up with Koi and Sky, which you most likely will in terms of farming, she's going to be able to use this skill multiple times in one turn thanks to Koi and Sky's first skill, lowering the cooldown by 2 turns. So yeah, pretty good synergy right there. If you don't go for Tiamat, you're just disrespectful. You're just not a good son, not a good daughter, not a good whatever you identify as. Honestly, you should just quit the game. You should just quit FGO because you don't deserve mommy anyway, bro. Like, just leave. So again, just to reiterate, she's a black grill looper on the same level as Mélusine, who will make you bento boxes all day, all night. Like, come on now. Come on now. You can't say she's not top tier, bro. Anyway, enough glazing mommy. Going into April, we are, of course, going to be given the FGO collab event, in which we will be introduced to a brand new servant class, or I should say a brand new playable servant class, because technically we're already aware of this class, but now it's a playable servant class, aka Beast Nero or Draco. And as a beast class servant, Draco does extra damage against the 7 main classes, aka the 7 original classes: Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Caster, Assassin, and Berserker. Essentially making her pretty much a Berserker against all the original classes, but unlike a Berserker in the sense that she doesn't take extra damage from them, instead she resists them. Which is pretty good, all things considered, since most of the enemies we fight are within those 7 main classes. But keep in mind, as a beast, she is weak to every other extra class. So if you're going to be using her, just make sure you keep that in mind. Otherwise, like I just said earlier, she's basically a beefier Berserker. Now, looking at her skills, as you can see, she has a lot going on. So let's go one by one with this. So her first skill, Number of the Beast, gives her NP gauge every turn for 6 turns. Not just 1 turn, not just 3 turns like the usual maximum for a lot of skills, but no, 6 turns. And at level 10, it has a cooldown of 7. In addition to that, she also gives critical strength 6 times, not 6 turns, but 6 times, and damage cut 6 times. And it only gets crazier and crazier from here. So her second skill does a bunch of debuffs and a couple of buffs, but the main buff that we're looking at with her second skill is she applies Holy Grail Possession to herself for 3 turns. And you might be like, what does that do? Well, if you look at her third skill, if she has that Holy Grail Possession buff on herself, she gets an additional set of buffs from her third skill that makes her insanely powerful and insanely self-sustaining, because her third skill already gives 100% buff removal resistance, which is honestly, that alone already makes that skill really good. But if she has Holy Grail Possession, she also gives herself debuff immunity. Granted, only a one-time use debuff immune, but debuff immune plus buff removal resistance, bro. There's not too many servants that's able to do that by themselves. She also gives herself another NP gauge every turn, this time for 3 turns, but still 20% for 3 turns, plus 10% from her first skill for 6 turns, basically 30% for 3 turns. And as a single target art servant with pretty good NP gain, all things considered, she pretty much guarantees herself that she's gonna get her NP next turn, especially coupled with the fact that she's most likely to be teamed up with Castoria. And funny enough, with all the crazy stuff that her skills do, her NP is the most simplistic out of everything in her kit. But just like with Tiamat, simplicity doesn't necessarily mean bad. In Draco's case with her NP, it is simple yet effective. With her NP, she deals an additional 150% extra damage against the 7 main classes, compounded with the fact that she is a beast class that already does extra damage against the 7 main classes. Now her NP does additional damage on top of that. So along with all of her buffs already and the Castoria buffs that you're inevitably going to pair her up with, Draco, no pun intended, is a beast of a servant. She is incredible. And like I said earlier, just having buff removal resistance 100% and debuff immunity is a godsend, because there's nothing worse than those challenge quests that just spam buff removal or just spam NP seal or spam skill seal or all those annoying debuffs that you might be getting. Draco, for at least one time, is able to resist them, which one time is better than no time. And the only thing she's really lacking is like a hard defense, like invincible or evade. But at the same time, again, teaming her up with Castoria can protect her, so it's not really the biggest weakness ever. So honestly, even though personally I don't necessarily think this way, I will put her at must-have, because I think most people would put her there. And had she not been a beast class, I feel like she fits more with this tier. But I also have to think about this, like if you're a new player, for example, because if you guys remember early FGO, before the quick meta, before the buster meta, before the arts meta, before looping was even a feasible thing, back in the day, back in my day, it used to be the Berserker meta. Berserker everything and win. Zerk everything and win. And for all intents and purposes, Draco as a beast is basically a berserker for the 7 main classes. And a lot of early game content doesn't really have a lot of extra class servants to worry about. Like obviously you fight rulers, you fight some Avengers here and there, but for the most part it's the 7 main classes. So Draco, especially early on, is super powerful. And even if you're not a new player and you're a veteran player, having her in your arsenal is honestly not a bad idea. So I'll just put it at must have just because she's a beast. Had she not been a beast but had the same exact skill set, I think highly recommend would make more sense. Kind of spoiler alert though, there is one other servant, arguably 2 other servants coming out of this year who are essentially side grades, not upgrades or downgrades I would say, but side grades to Draco in terms of being a single target arch servant. And we'll get to them when we get to them, and I'll let you know which out of the 3 of them I think is the best overall single target arch servant. Moving past Draco throughout April, it's pretty much a lot of rerun banners, a lot of Lostbelt banners, whatnot. And then going into May, we'll be introduced to 5-star assassin Kashin Koji. And no pun intended, but we are going to be quick with Kashin Koji because just like with Takasugi earlier in the year, she is another quick looper. So automatically you're going to be comparing her to Senorikyu, you're going to be comparing her to Karen. And to put it lightly, she just doesn't really compare to them. And just like the case with Nitocris Altria, even if she was amazing, even if she was really good, not saying she's horrible or anything like that, but even if she was like top tier on the level of other quick loopers, in the end of the day, she is a non-limited servant, just like Nitocris Altria. So again, I hate to disrespect her like that, but unless you really like her character, her design, or her lore, or whatever, I would put her in the bottommost tier because, again, non-limited servant, you could get her through spooks or through SSR tickets, whatever. So I'm sorry to my Kashin Koji fans out there, but that's pretty much just the fate of all non-limited servants, at least in my tier list. Speaking of Nitocris Altria, right after Kashin Koji, we will be getting like this ordeal call pre-campaign thing where Nitocris Altria will have another raid up. So again, if you want to go for her, go for her. But Kukulkan will also be coming back. So maybe you don't want to go for Kukulkan early on in the year, but she does come back around sometime at May after Kashin Koji, right before Ordeal Call 1. And then at the tail end of May, we will be getting Ordeal Call 1 itself with the introduction of 5-star Lancer Bhima. So Bhima is a single target Buster Lancer who focuses a lot on crit damage. At first glance, he's basically a Lancer version of Super Ryan, but this time with a damaging NP rather than a buffing NP. So if you're a big fan of those crits, then he's your guy. As far as single target Buster SSR Lancers, I guess there's not really that many competition, like immediate competition besides maybe Enkidu, since Enkidu is non-limited and most people probably have him at this point, but their kits are really different. Like Enkidu is like not really meant for crit damage, whereas Bhima is like straight crit damage, straight Buster, big numbers. And also keep in mind he's not limited, but he is story locked. So unless you're one of those weirdos that want to roll story banner, which more respect to you, if you really want Bhima, probably go for him while he has a raid up rather than risk story banner. Otherwise, yeah, pretty strong servant, really no complaints here. I mean, I would put him probably in good. Again, if he was like completely non-limited and able to spook you in any banner, he'd be all the way down here. But because he is story locked, which is essentially kind of like being limited if you don't roll story banner, then yeah, I'll put him at good. But there are alternatives as far as single target servants go. As far as Buster crit servants are concerned, there are alternatives out there, but I wouldn't put him at highly recommend just because he doesn't do anything too unique or too crazy to where I'm like, oh wow, that could be very useful for this situation or that situation. Or he's not like a farmer, obviously, as a single target. He's not like a farming servant, so you're not really gonna see him in that much play. So I think being in the middle ground of being good, but there are many alternatives, makes sense with him. And he's the first servant to go into that tier, so good for him. And right after Bhima, going into June at the tail end of May, we will be getting 5-star archer Durga. And who's keeping track? Because Durga is another arts AoE looper. But just like Bhima before her, she doesn't really offer anything that crazy, that unique to warrant prioritizing her over other servants, unless you really like her design, you're really a big fan of Sakura faces or whatever. But from my experience, she is a pretty good arts looper in general. If you already have like Summer John at a high level, then probably skip out on Durga completely. But she is slightly better than Summer John from my experience. That, and in terms of synergy with Castoria, her first skill does increase the party's overcharge, so that does work really well with Castoria's NP. And like I said with Tez before, just having a built-in ignore invincible is always appreciated with any looper. And to really make sure she's able to loop, she also changes all of her command cards to arts for 1 turn with her 3rd skill. So pretty good arts looper all things considered, but again, doesn't really offer anything too crazy, aside from being able to synergize with Castoria better than other loopers would be able to with her first skill. But I would put Durga personally at good, but there are many alternatives because again, compared to other arts loopers out there, in terms of everyday farming, in terms of everyday use, you're gonna get more bang out of your buck from other servants. But again, if you really like Durga, if you're for some reason in need of a really good archer, she's a really good choice. Moving on into June, it's pretty much a lot of rerun banners, campaigns here and there. And then we have Medusa Saber introduced in that feat event. So if you're into feat, I know some of you freaks love feat. So there you guys go. You guys get Medusa Saber with that event. And to simplify Medusa Saber as much as possible, she's basically just a Saber version of Kama, normal assassin Kama. She's a single target quick servant that's able to stun lock the opponent. That's pretty much her gimmick in a nutshell. Again, very similar to Kama with Charm, but this time with Medusa, it's Petrify or Stun. So if you spam out her NP with double Scotty or triple Scotty or double Scotty and Oberon, and your RNG is pretty good, then you could stun lock the enemy and pretty much get free hits, free turns to go off. But unlike Kama, in place of Guts, Medusa has a 3-hit, 3-turn invincibility and a 3-time use, 3-turn debuff immunity with her third skill, which I don't have to tell you is really, really good. That, and while Kama can only charm with her NP, Medusa basically has 2 chances to stun her enemy, either with her first skill with Petrify, which is a 100% chance, or her NP, which has a much lower chance at 40%. So in a way, not only is she a Saber version of Kama, but in a way she's a better version of Kama, because she actually has protection and she has 2 chances of getting the enemies hard. Okay, that don't sound right. And as far as single target sabers go, especially quick sabers, she's probably the pinnacle of quick sabers at this point in the game. So if you're lacking in a really good saber, honestly, I would put her at highly recommend. And then moving on from June, going into July, we will be going into our anniversary event. We will be introduced to our anniversary servant in the form of caster, spoiler alert, Morgan, or in other words, if you read Lostbelt 6, again, spoiler alert, Aesc the Savior. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call her Morgan. So as an anniversary servant, she has huge shoes to fill. Prior to her, obviously, we got Arquid, who is considered a really good Buster Looper. Then, of course, prior to Arquid, for several years, we've gotten a lot of great top-tier servants like Koi and Skya, of course, like Castoria, even Da Vinci Lily is considered one of the best arts loopers out there. And then, of course, Scotty, so on and so forth. So for the past half decade now, we've been getting a lot of broken servants for anniversary. So how does Summer Morgan, how does Caster Morgan, Aesc the Savior, how does she hold up? And just to be blunt with it, she isn't broken at all. Some might even say she's not great at all. She's just good. And honestly, it's kind of hard to argue with that because she's a good servant. And it's not to say she's a bad servant. I just said she's a good servant. She's an AoE buster servant who is capable of looping, but her setup is a bit awkward. And a lot of people like to say that in the end of the day, what she does as a looper could be accomplished much easier and much simpler and much cheaper with Caster Ku. Both are buster servants, both are caster servants, both are AoE, both are casters, both are AoE busters, both can loop, but at the end of the day, Caster Ku is a lot cheaper than Summer Morgan. So the question really is, what does Summer Morgan offer that's different from other buster loopers like Caster Ku or any of our other buster looping colleagues? So first skill's pretty good, NP gauge for everybody for 3 turns, which no one can complain about. Gain crit start every turn. Can't really complain about that either. Increases her own NP gauge with 50%, I'm pretty sure. And NP strength up for 3 turns. So first skill's already looking promising, right? And then her second skill, for all intents and purposes, is just like a normal generic charisma under normal circumstances in looping situations. But in a longer drawn out fight where everybody's taking hits, depending on how low her HP is or depending on how low her allies' HPs are, they will get an additional 10% attack up depending on how low their HP is. So again, in a longer drawn out fight, that could be useful, I guess, getting that further attack up. But in my opinion, it's super marginal, and at the same time, you really don't want to get your allies at that low of an HP. Granted, with Morgan's third skill, she does grant guts to the entire party. So I guess if you do get the guts to proc, and they do revive with minimal HP, then that could make her second skill, her charisma skill, reach maximum percentage, I guess. And speaking of her third skill, in addition to guts, it also gives 50% battery, not only to herself, but to the entire party. So that's really, really crazy when you think about it. 50% to not only yourself, but the entire party. Not just one ally, not just 2 allies, but everybody gets 50% right off the jump. So what's the catch, you might be asking? As good as her third skill is, you can't use it right off the jump. In other words, right when you go out with her, it's already going to have a 5-turn cooldown as if you did use it. So either you got to wait 5 turns in order to make use of it, or you got to lower her cooldown via skills or via NP or via Mystic Code. Which isn't the worst thing in the universe, right? Because if you're going to be teaming up with Double Koyan, for example, they're going to lower her cooldown. And then with the future 5th Depend skill, you basically will have that right off the jump at turn 1 anyway. And when you use Morgan's NP, it does lower her 3rd skill cooldown by 1. But keep in mind, after you use it the first time around, it's going to have a 10-turn cooldown instead of a 5-turn cooldown. Which, depending on the situation, isn't that bad, because if you keep spamming out her NP, eventually she'll get to her 3rd skill a lot quicker than it might seem. But still, 10 turns is a pretty hefty amount of time. Obviously, you're not going to be worried about that 10-turn cooldown in a farming situation. You're probably just going to use the skill once and just be done with it. But I guess this is where Caster Morgan shines in much longer fights. Like if you team her up with Himiko and Castoria, or with Merlin and Coinsky, or any other combination of teams where it's focused on not only damage but also stalling, then I suppose she could shine, and I suppose she could outlive her other buster colleagues like Casterku, for example. Like Casterku is probably better overall for farming, but in terms of longer fights, Caster Morgan definitely has the edge up. And there's not a lot of other servants that offer guts to everybody, as well as 50% NP to everybody, or not really any servants at all that offer the latter, to be honest. But if it wasn't obvious already, she's definitely not on the same level of even Arquid, or on the same level of course, the other anniversary servants we got in the past couple of years, where she is a game changer, a meta definer, somebody who is a must-have in every account. Now, obviously, she's a fan favorite. Everybody and their mother is crazy about Lostbelt 6, and everybody is crazy, of course, about Morgan. So in a way, she is a must-have if you're just looking at her from a character standpoint, or maybe even a design standpoint, because she does have a really nice design. Witch hat and glasses, bro. Takeuchi definitely cooked with her design. But if we're talking purely gameplay, again, she does a lot of unique stuff, but nothing meta-defining, nothing crazy, nothing super reliable. And as far as looping goes, again, there's a myriad of other buster loopers you could choose from. And as far as casters go, Casterku is literally just a 3-star alternative that's a lot cheaper, a lot easier to access, and a lot easier to utilize. Also, I forgot to mention her NP does give herself invincibility, which is good. Obviously, having some kind of protection is always good, but it does clash a little bit with her whole gimmick of having less HP, and it does clash with the fact that she has guts. But of course, you know, that's not that big of a deal. And anyway, I don't want to ramble on too long about her, because I do feel kind of bad, because I'm gonna put her, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want to put her here, but I don't want to get too crazy here. Okay, I don't want to get too wild. I'm sure some of you guys will be putting her at the bottommost tier. You guys are gonna be skipping out on her, but I'm gonna put her here because she is technically good. She is, and she does have her place in challenge quests and in longer drawn out fights. But ironically enough, Berserker Morgan is probably still better in those longer drawn out fights. Like literally Morgan, Merlin, and Castoria, those 3 in a team is still to this day one of the best like stalling teams out there. And if you substitute Berserker Morgan with her caster variant, she isn't as effective in those type of team comps. So yeah, I'll settle with her on that tier. But again, if you want to put her a tier below, if you think she's a tier below, then I completely understand. At the same time though, if you want to put her at must-have, because in the end of the day, maybe gameplay isn't the main focus for you, maybe it's all about the character, maybe it's all about the design, in which case, if we're just looking at character and design, I'd put her at must-have, because again, witch hat plus glasses, bro. But I think this is a fair tier for her to be in, if not a little bit generous. And then moving on from anniversary, we are going to be getting another Saber face right away, this time in the form of Berzatoria or Berserker Castoria, or Castoria Berserker. I'm just gonna call her Berzatoria for simplicity's sake, but yeah. So earlier with Draco, if you remember, I mentioned that there's gonna be 2 other single target art servants in 2025 that I would say are side grades to Draco, or in other words, are interchangeable with her. And one of those servants that is interchangeable with Draco, in my opinion, is Berzatoria. So Berzatoria has everything you want from an art servant. She has a battery, she has NP gain, she has arts effectiveness up, she has not 1, but 2 forms of protection, with her 3rd skill giving invincibility, and her NP, similar to normal Castoria, gives anti-enforcement, not just to herself, but to the entire party. But unlike normal Castoria, you can't overcharge it to get more protection. It's just a 1 hit and done, regardless of overcharge or NP level. But I mean, anti-enforcement to the party is still anti-enforcement to the party. Just keep in mind though, since you are most likely going to be teaming Berzatoria with normal Castoria, don't use Castoria's NP after Berzatoria to try to overcharge, because if you already have anti-enforcement from Berzatoria, you're not going to be able to apply Castoria's anti-enforcement, if that makes sense. So very rarely you want to use both their NPs at the same turn, especially if your idea is to try to get more protection. Also, unlike Castoria, who has no skills or any buffs that have anything to do with crits or crit stars, Berzatoria has a lot of crit oriented skills in that she has critical strength up for 3 turns, critical gather rate for 3 turns with her first skill, as well as crit star drop every turn with her 3rd skill. And speaking of normal Castoria and the synergy that she might have with her Berserker counterpart, Berzatoria also has a targetable 20% NP gauge for an ally, but in addition to that, she also increases their NP overcharge by 2. So obviously in most situations, you're going to be giving that to normal Castoria. That way you do have that overcharge effect and thus those additional protections. And depending on the enemy you're facing, she also does extra damage against threat to humanity, extra damage against chaotic enemies, and extra damage against divine enemies. So if they just happen to have all 3 of those traits, which I actually don't know how common that is, then she's gonna do dummy damage. So why do I say she's like a side grade to Draco? Well, again, Draco is a really good single target arts servant who, for all intents and purposes, basically functions as a berserker, at least for the 7 main classes. In Berzatoria's case though, since she is an actual berserker, she's gonna do extra damage against most enemies. That, and unlike Draco, she has built-in protection in the forms of not only invincible with her 3rd skill, but also the anti-enforcement with her 3rd skill, and the synergy with the NP overcharge she has with her 2nd skill that she could give to normal Castorias for more and further protection. So I think in terms of overall damage, Draco is probably better, but as somebody who has Draco at NP2 and at the same time has Berzatoria at NP2, I find myself relying on Berzatoria a lot more than Draco. I just think having those extra layer of protections, that extra layer of support for the team is super convenient, especially for boss fights and challenges in which you're going to be using one or the other. So this might be controversial, but I think I'm going to put Berzatoria at the same tier as Draco. Again, had Draco not been a beast, I would put her a tier below. And because I am basically saying Draco and Berzatoria are pretty much interchangeable, I'll put Berzatoria at the same tier as Draco. But because Draco is in the must-have tier, I feel inclined to put Berzatoria here too. But in my opinion, and this might be a hot take, in my opinion, Berzatoria, in terms of reliability, in terms of convenience, in terms of a longer drawn out fight, I do genuinely think Berzatoria is the better of the 2. In terms of damage, however, in terms of maybe being more self-sustainable, in terms of having that debuff immunity and that buff removal resistance, obviously Draco is a bit better in that utility regard. So it really depends on you which one is better. In the end of the day, I think most people are probably going to prioritize Draco because he is a beast class. It's a new class, you know, it is what it is. But from my experience, I just think Berzatoria is better of the 2. And you know what? Even if you don't think Berzatoria is a must-have servant, the gacha itself where she's in is a must-go-to gacha because she is accompanied with Summer Chloe. And I'm not going to go into Summer Chloe too much because this is an SSR tier list in the end of the day. But just remember what I said with Kukulkan. Kukulkan cannot Black Grail loop in traditional Koi and Sky and Oberon teams unless you team her up with Chloe, Summer Chloe. As a support servant, Summer Chloe, in my opinion, is a must-have, a must-get servant. So if you're not completely sold on Berzatoria, just remember she is accompanied with Summer Chloe. But to cap off Summer, we are going to be getting ruler Mélusine. And just like a million other servants in this list, Summer Mélusine is an AoE arts looper. But unlike Pope Johanna before her, Mélusine is actually an extremely effective arts looper. But unlike normal Mélusine, she isn't crazy. Like, she isn't broken. She isn't doing like crazy damage like normal Mélusine does. She's still super reliable, able to loop effectively, able to loop reliably. But when compared to, of course, again, the usual Summer Ibuki, and now compared to Tez, who is considered one of the best, if not the second best arts looper in the game, Mélusine is probably more like Spacious Star tier, more like Summer Kama tier, more like Avenger Nitocris tier, where she's really good, but there is a small handful of other servants that are technically better. So I hate to do Mélusine like this. I feel like I'm doing her dirty by making her segment in this video nice and quick, but there really isn't that much to talk about her. She's a good looper, and that's kind of it. So I'll put her at good, but there are many alternatives. Now I kind of want to put Kirei down here with her, I feel bad for having Kirei here, but again, I'm biased, so it is what it is. I love Kirei. If Tiamat is mommy, then, you know, Kirei is daddy, you know what I'm saying? So that pretty much concludes anniversary and summer, and then the next 5-star that we are going to be getting at some point at the later half of the year. Again, Kirei gets another rate up, by the way, so maybe not go for him in the beginning of the year if you are tight in quartz or whatever, but as we go down over around the September later in the year, again, this might be different, it might be later, might be earlier, depending on how NA wants to do it, but we are getting 5-star foreigner Wandjina. And I don't know if this is fair to say, because in the end of the day, Wandjina is the first Australian servant in the game, which is always cool to see new cultures get introduced, get representation in FGO, right? But if we're talking from a purely gameplay standpoint, she doesn't really stand out. And to be honest, she is a little bit forgettable. And this coming from somebody who loves all the foreigners. And I do like Wandjina, but she is overall kind of forgettable. So just to keep it nice and simple and straight to the point, if you don't have a lot of good single target quick servants, like I'm talking about Ushi Avenger, or maybe earlier in the year Medusa Saber or Kama, Bazette, MHX Alter notably, or if we're just looking at foreigners, for example, maybe like Yango Fei, MHXX, if you don't have any of those single target servants that could arguably do what Wandjina does in their own way, at their own level, if not a higher level, depending on the situation, then Wandjina is a largely skippable servant. And I would say she's good, but there are alternatives. I wouldn't say she is overall skippable, because she is genuinely a good servant, but there is just a lot of alternatives out there, so I'll just put her here. I think that's a fair assessment for her. Had she been a non-limited servant, I definitely would have put her down here, but you know, she is good. She is good, so I'll put her here. It just kind of depends on the situation which one will be better over the other. I mean, no one's gonna complain about having more options, right? Speaking of having options, after Wandjina, we are gonna be introduced to 5-star archer Ptolemy around October. And the reason I say speaking of options is because with Ptolemy, with his third skill, just like with Mélusine, he's able to change his NP type and his overall sprite and his card type. So if you have him at Ascension 1 or 2, he changes to Ascension 3, and then his NP goes from Arts to Buster. More specifically, Arts AoE to Buster single target. Pretty much a reverse of Mélusine, but like the same kind of idea. One of the main differences between Ptolemy and Mélusine is that once you are able to use Ptolemy's third skill again, he will be able to revert back to an AoE Arts servant. And also keep in mind, if you start off with him at Ascension 3, like if you set him to Ascension 3, then his third skill will convert him into Ascension 1, essentially giving him his Arts AoE NP right away. So yeah, it should go without saying, Ptolemy is a pretty cool servant. I mean, any servant that's able to change their NP type, able to change their animations, their sprite. There's only a handful of servants that do that, so it's pretty cool to see another one introduced into the game. But while Mélusine is seen as one of the best Buster Loopers in the entire game, Ptolemy is both a good, not great or amazing, but a good AoE art servant, and a good, but not amazing at the same time, a good single target Buster servant. And I suppose you could make like a really weird and niche Buster arts oriented team where you switch between both of his NPs, and maybe you team him up with Merlin and Castoria, or Castoria and Himiko, and you can make like a really fun arts Buster looping stall team of some kind, I guess. But aside from his crazy fun gimmicks, he's just that. He's just good. He's good. He's fun. But he's nothing crazy. He's not meta-defining. He's not going to change the game like the way Mélusine did, where Mélusine just outshines a good chunk of Buster Loopers out there, outside of Mommy, of course. So I think it's fair to put him at good, but there are many alternatives. Technically, there aren't any alternatives as far as being to switch between NPs and whatnot. Like, really, the only other servant at the time of recording this in the NA is Mélusine. But if we're looking at Ptolemy as purely an AoE art servant, obviously, there's a lot of options. And at the same time, if you look at him as a single target Buster servant, there's a lot of options. So I think this tier fits in the most. But if you're a big fan of that, like that fun gimmicks, then I suppose you could put him at a higher tier, kind of like how I put Kirei up there, because he has like fun gimmicks going on. But otherwise good, but there are many alternatives that make sense with him. Moving on from Ptolemy, going on to pretty much our last event of the year, pretty much at the end of the year, going on to November, going on to December. Well, technically, I guess the Christmas event is the last event of the year, but we don't get any new 5-stars from there. But we do get a new set of 5-stars in the November event, in the Gouda event. Starting off with 5-star rider Takeda Shingen. And Shingen is interesting to say the least, because similar to Takasugi earlier in the year, unless you really like his design and his character and whatnot, I personally wouldn't go for him. And it's because his kit is fairly basic. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. It's not even simple. It's basic. I think simple could be a good thing. In this case, he's just basic. He's pretty mid. Yeah, he has a form of protection. He does have NP gauge and the whole 9 yards that you would want from your typical servant, but he's really not that remarkable. His NP damage isn't that great. He doesn't do anything unique to where he stands out to where even if he does lack in NP damage, maybe he has this like unique and cool gimmick. He doesn't even have that. Probably one of those servants that need like at least 2 buffs in order to be decent. So I think it's obvious. It goes without saying that I'm sorry, my Shingen fans out there, but he's going in the lowest tier possible. I am so sorry about you, sir. For my Shingen fans out there, again, I wholeheartedly apologize, but he just isn't really that good at all. And to cap off the year, we are gonna have a second 5-star to be introduced in the Guda event along with Shingen in the form of 5-star ruler Nagao Kagetora or Uesugi Kenshin. And if it wasn't obvious already, Uesugi Kenshin is the second servant I was talking about that I would say is interchangeable with Draco, and I guess by proxy also interchangeable with Berserker. Just like them, Kenshin is also a single target arch servant that is able to loop pretty effectively. Unlike Draco, but just like Berserker, she does have her own built-in protection in the form of evade with her first skill, and is also able to buff up her crits, her crit damage, and her crit gather rate. And not to sound too much like a broken record, but just like Berserker, she also has a targetable NP overcharge +2 on an ally, so obviously very good synergy with Castoria, being able to put up more defenses in a longer fight. Now, obviously, in terms of damage, she's not going to out-damage Berserker or out-damage Draco. Draco, for all intents and purposes, is a Berserker, and Berserker is a Berserker. And since Uesugi Kenshin is a ruler, she's most likely to be doing neutral damage against the enemy. So in terms of damage, she definitely loses out against Draco and against Berserker. But what does she do that's unique to her that the other two can't do? Because again, if we look at Draco, she has the debuff immune and she has the buff removal resistance. If we look at Berserker, she has that anti-enforcement for the entire party. So what does Kenshin do that makes her stand out or puts her right below or on the same level as Berserker and Draco? Well, with her NP, Kenshin does remove buffs before damage. And to some of you guys, you might be like, that's not really that big of a deal. But really think about that for a sec. Unlike Draco and Berserker, she's not going to need an additional buff or a craft essence that's going to give her pierce. That, and if she's facing an enemy or a boss that likes to spam out different annoying buffs, she's going to remove those. And having that utility is honestly super underrated, I feel like. Plus the fact that just like Berserker, she has very good synergy with Castoria in terms of putting up more defenses with the NP overcharge. That, and she also has her own built-in protection with evade. I think in a lot of ways she is interchangeable with Draco and Berserker. But I do think in the end of the day, since she is a ruler, so unless you're facing Berserkers or Moon Cancers, or I guess Draco as a beast, Uesugi Kenshin is most likely going to be doing neutral damage, and it's going to be doing significantly less damage than both Berserker and Draco. So even though so far it might sound like I would put Kenshin on this tier, I will put her the tier below, just because she's not quite on their level, but in some given situations in which removing buffs from the enemy is actually more integral to winning the fight rather than just having big dummy damage, I think in those situations she is going to be out delivering and outperforming Berserker and Draco. Otherwise, Kenshin does deserve to be in that top tier. But again, like I said earlier, had it not been for Draco's beast class, she would be down here and then Berserker would be dragged down with her. But for the sake of having a servant or two in the must-have category, I'll put them there. Why not? So I'd like to think my tier list is pretty solid. Like if we go from the bottom up, Nitocris Alter being a non-limited servant, I think she's not that big of a priority. Pope Johanna, not that great of a servant in terms of both support and AoE. Takasugi is just not that great, not that stand-out-ish. Same thing with Kashin Koji, in addition to her also being a non-limited servant. And of course, Shingen is just probably the weakest. If we're like not even looking at rarity or like limited versus non-limited, he's probably the weakest of all the servants to come out of 2025. And then moving on to the good tier, these are all good servants in their own right. In certain given situations, it could even be great, like Mélusine, very good looper. Durga, very good looper. Bhima, very strong buster crit damaging servant. There's really not a lot of single target buster lancers, I guess, but there are a lot of single target buster servants in general that are able to deliver as far as crits go. And then of course there's Wandjina, who's kind of like the quick version of Bhima in terms of my rationale as far as why she's here. Like there's a lot of other alternatives out there, and depending on the situation she might be better suited than others, but for the most part you could kind of interchange her with a lot of different servants out there. And then of course Summer Morgan, who depending on you might have her at the must-have, you might even have her at the most bottom tier, but I'm going to be very generous with her and just put her at the good, but there are many alternatives, aka the many alternatives being all the other Buster AoE loopers out there like Kasserku, Tiamat later down the road, technically Kukulkan or Juno Alter, pretty much every other Buster servant to be honest. And then Ptolemy, who is able to be a single target servant and an AoE servant at the same time, but he's not the best at either one, but he's really good at both. So it really depends on how you want to use him and if you want to make like a fun little Buster arts team. And then going on to the highly recommend, again, Kenshin, had she not been a ruler and had been a berserker just like Berzatoria or maybe even a beast, they wouldn't make her a beast, but just theoretically speaking, if she was a beast, she would be up here at must have. But unless you're facing moon cancers or berserkers, then the other two might be more effective. Then the other two are more than likely effective. And then you have Kukulkan, 5-star foreigner, one of the strongest servants in terms of crit, one of the strongest servants in terms of Buster NP, and definitely, in my opinion, has the best passive skill in the entire game. And then Tez, considered one of the best arts loopers in the game, despite being an assassin, has a pretty unique passive skill of increasing Mystic Code effectiveness by 10%, which is pretty marginal, but still something to take note of. Has built-in Ignore Invincible, has also his own form of protection as well. That does apply to the entire team. And then you have Kirei, who obviously I'm super biased with, so that's why he's on this tier for the most part. But I could see people putting him on this tier below here, which I wouldn't argue against, but I just think his role as a tank is just something that's super unique. The whole 5-turn NP damage up to everybody and the whole crit up that he gets every time he gets hit. And just having a 3-turn taunt too, like think about that. Like Mashu has a 1-turn taunt, and then in her Lostbelt self, in her Ordinax self, she basically has a 2-turn taunt, but Kirei has a 3-turn taunt. So in terms of tanking, I would argue he's the best tank in the game. But again, super biased, I understand that. So if you want to put him a tier below, you can. But I think for me, I would put him at highly recommend because there's really not that many other tanks that could do his job. And then you have Medusa Saber, for all intents and purposes, is the best single target quick saber in the game. Just because she's basically Assassin Kama, who is considered by many the best single target assassin as far as quicks go. So if you just translate her gimmick into Saber form, that's what you get with Medusa Saber. So it just makes sense Medusa Saber is the best single target quick saber. And then moving on to must-have. Again, I wouldn't say these are must-haves. I'm sure a lot of people would say just Draco herself, just being a beast class, is a must-have. But I really think Berzatoria is the better of the two. I just find her a lot more reliable than Draco. Of course, it depends on the situation. If there's a lot of buff removal, a lot of debuff action going on, then Draco is definitely the better of the two. But Berzatoria, just her protection on the entire party is just insane. Otherwise, if you're already okay with Galatea, if you're already okay somehow with Vlad, or maybe you want to prioritize Kenshin over these two, then you are more than welcome to do so. These servants aren't necessarily must-haves in the same level of Oberon, Koyan, Castoria, Scotty, and even non-limited servants like Waver. I wouldn't put Draco or Berzatoria on their level. But within the context of the servants that are coming out in 2025, just looking at them, they're probably must-haves. But again, it's all subjective. And then, of course, you got the topmost tier, the best tier. The only tier that matters is the mommy tier. And, of course, the definitive FGO mommy. Sorry, Raiko. Sorry, Emiya. Sorry, all the other mommies out there. But the definitive mommy of FGO in the form of Tiamat is my personal #1 servant of 2025. Obviously, if I was being a bit more objective and a bit less biased, I would probably put her at highly recommend because she's basically another Mélusine, a side grade to Mélusine. Some might argue Mélusine is slightly better just because of the built-in Ignore Invincibility and the built-in crit-oriented skills. But in terms of farming, in terms of looping, I think Tiamat is up there with Mélusine. And in terms of my tier list, in terms of my bias ass, in terms of my Oedipus complex ass, Tiamat is #1, numero uno, psycho no servant, all that shit, you know, she is my #1. But comment down below, who is your biggest priority of 2025 and how many quartz do you currently have in store for that one servant? And if you have the time, maybe also comment down below your personal tier list if you have that time to do that. That'd be very interesting to look at and read. And of course, like the video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, and subscribe to become a supporting character. To me, the main character, because without you guys, I'd be the only character. So yeah, let's try to get to 10k for 2025, because to hit 10k during the 10th anniversary of FGO would be pretty cool. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one. This coming New Year's, happy holidays, happy New Year's, happy Hanukkah. I just hope you have a great week. I don't even know if you guys are even watching this during the holidays. You might be watching this in the middle of 2025, in which case I just hope you have a great week and a great weekend and a great month and a great gacha experience with FGO. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.